to internal power. All stages switching now to internal power. All propellant tanks being pressurized. T-minus 20 seconds. And the countdown continues to go smoothly. Guidance release. T-minus 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. We have ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And we have a liftoff.
With the power of 1,000 racing cars, Skylab thundered toward space in May 1973. Its mission, to explore the Earth.
Orbit. Still some doubt in the minds of flight controllers here in Mission Control as to whether the main solar panels on the workshop.
Skylab was the refitted third stage of a massive Saturn V, the central part serving as a workshop. Solar panels providing electricity for running the station, one panel each side of the workshop, and 4 wing-shaped arrays for experiments. When Houston got word a solar wing had been ripped off during launch, a special umbrella was made to protect the workshop hull, exposed by a sun shield that also came off. Now, Skylab astronauts would have to fly a rescue mission to save the crippled space station from heating up in the scorching sun and running out of power. Controllers soon learned the other solar wing had been snagged by debris when the first panel tore loose. So without a helping hand, that too would be unusable.
T-minus 17 seconds and counting. T-minus 15. At T-minus 3.1 seconds, we'll expect the engine sequence to start on the vehicle. T-minus 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Engine sequence start. 2, 1. 0.
10 days late and packed out with sunshades, giant scissors, and a tool chest the envy of a motor mechanic, Conrad, Weitz, and Kerwin rode a Saturn 1B to the limping laboratory with an exhilarating call from the commander.
Tower in Houston, Skylab 2. We fix anything. I got a pitch and a roll program. Solar Wing 1 is in fact partially deployed, and the reason that you've got different readings not symmetric between your 3 solar panels is there's a bulge of meteorite shield underneath it in the middle, and it looks to be holding it down.
At last contact over the Vanguard tracking station, the crew of Skylab 2 was having difficulty in redocking. They'd made several attempts and were going down through the backup procedures for retracting in and extending the...
Finding it difficult to dock after a quick fly-round inspection, the Apollo capsule pulled back, viewing the long solar wing pinned down against the workshop hull.
Control system thrusters, whereas they had been only on 2-jet thrusting during the stand-up EVA to prevent the RCS plume from striking the pilot as he stood in the hatch.
Houston through the Vanguard. How do you read?
Got a hard dock out of it.
Hey, way to go.
With a cry of success, Skylab's rescue crew moved inside. Temperatures were over 100 degrees, and the food freezers were near to collapse in the sweltering heat. First priority was to maneuver the sunshade through an airlock in the workshop wall. And then, with consummate skill, Conrad and Weitz pulled free the one remaining solar wing, putting electrical power aboard Skylab. Two days after launch, Skylab had been repaired. It was a 100-ton hotel with as much room as a 3-story house, enough food for 6 months in space, and a view literally out of this world.
I'm not convinced that this is all motion sickness either.
Medical tests and dental checks, measurements of respiration and heart rate, all vital to the healthy condition of a Skylab astronaut. Keeping fit was essential and amusing. And in space, it seemed, you could perform incredible feats of human strength, or so it looked. But where the only barber was a fellow astronaut, it sometimes paid to keep your hat on. And as for the shower, at least that got a guy away from the kitchen.
Eat our meal right now, and it looks like we'll probably be working around for another hour or so. We've had to move extremely slowly to
Now astronauts could linger on fascinating experiments involving blood samples, gyroscopes, oscillating springs, and machines to measure the weight of a weightless object.
So we tend to be fairly careful how we move. The command module for some picture taking, but our friend Arabella did some good work last night. She's got very unusual web spun around all the 4 corners of the box with some stringers even from corner to corner, so she had to do a lot of improvising.
To practice working in space, Skylab astronauts flew a special maneuvering unit built to move them about from one place to another. Propelled by tiny nitrogen thrusters, the backpack gave a glimpse of the future when shuttle crews would freely move around outside their space vehicles.
And the crew aboard Skylab continuing to direct most of their activities toward observing the sun, where early this morning there was a very large solar flare, described by Commander Al Bean as the Big Daddy, and by scientists here in Mission Control Center as the brightest and largest solar flare in the past year, covered an area 10 times as large as the planet Earth, and occurred in active region 9 on the sun's southwest quadrant.
A more down-to-earth science, backed up by pictures from the Landsat spacecraft, viewed the ground for the biggest inventory of the world ever made. Water pollution, the movement of fish shoals, shifting sands in a river estuary, mixed the science of the sea with the search for tropical storms above the raging ocean. From its vantage point in space between May 73 and February 74, Skylab peered into the man-made problems on a threatened planet. America and Russia signed a historic agreement to shake hands in space, and Brezhnev and Nixon met to seal the plan. It was a unique occasion. In Moscow, teams of American engineers, scientists and astronauts met with their Soviet counterparts. A Soyuz was being prepared for an act of cooperation unimagined when the moon race forged a spirit of unbridled competition. Deke Slayton failed to make it first time round, but would fly aboard Apollo to dock with Soyuz in orbit. Alexei Leonov, the first to walk in space, would command a Soviet ship. Apollo-Soyuz brought cosmonaut and astronaut together professionally for the first time, and for a while, fettered pride evaporated in the struggle against common danger. Essentially a Soviet design, the docking unit was very different to Apollo equipment, and the first of its kind.
Onboard control systems of the registration equipment here. Ignition. The power of the engine.
In 1966, only months after 3 Americans were killed in a launch pad fire, cosmonaut Komarov died when Soyuz 1 crashed uncontrollably to Earth. 5 years later, 3 Russians died aboard Soyuz 11 when their capsule depressurized in space. The Soviets took special precautions and turned a 3-man spacecraft into a 2-man capsule with spacesuits for both, where previously they had none.
40 seconds, the flight is normal.
In June 75, Soyuz, carrying Leonov and Kubasov, roared into orbit, there to reside and wait for an Apollo capsule carrying Stafford, Slayton, and Brand. It would be the last flight of Apollo, the last launch of a Saturn rocket, and the last NASA manned mission to splash down in water. Not for nearly 6 years would another American astronaut fly into orbit.
The engines will actually...
In the control room at Houston, they received confirmation that Soyuz was safely in space. At the launch control site in Florida, everything was ready.
Ready light on. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, engines on start. 0.
2 days later, Apollo met Soyuz nearly 200 miles above Earth.
Have you got a good view of him, Vince? Apollo, Houston, I got 2 messages for you. Moscow is go for docking. Houston is go for docking. It's up to you guys. Have fun. All righty, sounds good. Apollo,
For more than 14 years, the 2 most powerful nations on Earth had challenged each other in space. Now, they would unite.
Present you with 5 flags for your government and the people of the Soviet Union.
Joined docked spacecrafts Apollo and Soyuz with the 2 U.S. and USSR flags side by side.
When they said goodbye nearly 48 hours later, it was the end of what many had hoped could be a new age of cooperation. With 2 great powers marching together into the cosmos. That was not to be. Soyuz returned after 6 days in space. Apollo stayed 3 days more and then came home. On the way down, jettisoned fuel got into the capsule and almost poisoned the crew. They landed upside down in the Pacific, but not for long.
Hatches open. Package containing the film or the experiment handed out. The back's open. There's the other one. We don't know which was which. The astronaut.
Russia's manned space program would ride on the fortunes of one major project, a laboratory called Salyut. With automatic rendezvous and docking equipment, Soyuz would fly teams of cosmonauts to work aboard Salyut for months on end. Much smaller than Skylab, occupied by NASA astronauts in '73, it would last much longer, each Salyut giving up to 5 years' service before replacement by another of the same type. Between Apollo-Soyuz and the start of America's shuttle flights, Russian cosmonauts would fly 22 missions to Salyuts in orbit and put teams in space for 6 months at a time. From a TV camera mounted outside Soyuz, a Salyut space station looms into view, its huge antenna dominating the front end. Within seconds, docking is completed. Orbiting the planet with an almost continuous presence of man in space, Salyut served military and domestic functions, testing new equipment and making a comprehensive survey of Soviet territory. Salyut would be home for 2 men at a time, only occasionally going outside to repair or service the orbiting laboratory. And getting inside the suit was a case of using the back entrance and working your way through to the front. Cosmonauts used an airlock to move outside without depressurizing the interior of the main station, frequently taking with them cameras wrapped in covers to protect delicate parts from the sun's rays. Several times, the Salyut cosmonauts went outside to conduct scientific experiments, effect minor repairs, replace worn-out equipment, or inspect the exterior. By the late 1970s, a regular pattern of Soyuz missions took cosmonauts into space, with men from East European and other pro-Soviet countries carried on short trips to visit the long-stay occupants aboard Salyut. New, modified control equipment was built, and an air of expanding commitment filtered through. The Russians were in space to stay. Using contour couches moved through the station from one Soyuz to another, cosmonauts on short visits left their new capsule for the long-stay crew and went home in the older spacecraft. Even the personalized suits were moved from a Soyuz at one end to a Soyuz at the other. The most astonishing saga of all was the record of Salyut 6. It was occupied on and off for almost 4 years. In that time, 19 Soyuz capsules were launched, and very long missions gave a wealth of data on the physical effects of weightlessness. Before Salyut 6, the flight duration record was the 84-day Skylab mission, which ended February 74. Redesigned Soyuz capsules packed out with food, fuel, and provisions instead of cosmonauts, and called Progress supply ships, were sent to restock the stations. Salyut 6 alone received 12 Progress types, keeping it operational far beyond the life of supplies carried at launch. Ferry ships bringing essential equipment doubled as mail carriers for homesick cosmonauts, and even a guitar or two was known to get smuggled aboard. Letters from loved ones and music tapes from the Bolshoi shared room with fuel tanks and dehydrated food. In March 78, the world's first international manned space mission carried a Czech cosmonaut to visit Romanenko and Grechko aboard Salyut. In the next 4 years, men from Poland, East Germany, Bulgaria, Hungary, Vietnam, Cuba, Mongolia, Romania, and France made a similar trip to Salyut 6 and its successor. Setting up the world's first unofficial post office in space, the cosmonauts returned with unique mementos of an exceptional journey. Exercise kept cosmonauts in physical trim, and all the rules of the fitness game that worked aboard America's Skylab applied equally to Russia's long-duration flights. On some missions, 2 hours a day on exercise was a vital part of staying in condition. And a vital part of getting on with a fellow pilot was to take a shower as often as the cramped conditions would allow. The land, agriculture, and coastal resources of the Soviet Union gained measurably from the surveillance role of Salyut, providing regular observations of remote areas. The routine flights provide a consistent development for Russian space technology, and long-duration missions look ahead to the day Soviet cosmonauts will head for Mars, a journey that would last at least 7 months. As cosmonauts on long flights return home, the stresses of re-entry put great strain on the human body. Conditions on the ground are not always favorable to a good recovery, and there is always uncertainty about the pilot's condition. To guard against physical injury or harm easily caused to a cosmonaut back from several months in space, caution prevails, and the pilot is gently lowered to the ground. It is speculation about the limits to human endurance which makes each long-duration flight a new chapter in the annals of physiology, turning each mission into a pioneering endeavor at the frontier of human knowledge. From the Johnson Space Center at Houston, NASA abandoned the old dinosaurs of the space age to set its sights far beyond the limits of present technology. The huge rockets of yesteryear no longer had a mission. Capsules like Apollo were now showpieces in a museum. A new age was about to dawn. The shuttle would be its cornerstone. For 10 years, Rockwell and a host of subcontractors labored to build the world's first reusable spacecraft, a winged rocket to fly back down from orbit and land like an aeroplane. Carried on top of a Boeing 747, the shuttle would first flex its wings in the atmosphere, proving it could fly like a glider and gently return to Earth under full control. It was a very far cry from the tiny Apollo capsule, yet could fit comfortably on the floor of the shuttle's cabin.
Okay, all operators, go for takeoff. GNC, go. Fido, go. Arrow, go. Loki, go. Network, go. Inco, go. FAO, go. Homer, go. AMR, go. Rockwell, go. Roger, Roger, we're go for takeoff.
Skylab's coming to find.
Okay, Enterprise is set. Thanks to the left mid. And we'll stand by for the bang, Cardo. Wasn't too bad. Okay, she's flying good. Okay, he's start to turn now. Right. Enterprise, you're clear to start to turn. Okay, starting to turn to final. You got to. Straighten her up, Cardo. Not quite straight. Okay. Slightly low. Okay. Stop her here a minute. Yeah, we ought to be turning at 7. Okay. Oh, good luck for position. Okay. Okay, we are armed and clear. Standing by the gear. Okay, the gear is coming down at 270. Coming down. Mark. Gear coming. Okay, 3 down. Gear's down. 240. 230. 220, lots of speed. Beautiful. 210. 210. 200. 195. The brakes are coming. Okay, 60 knots. Try the nose wheel. Okay. That was too good a glider. Picture book flight, wasn't it? Congratulations, boy. Thank you.
To fly into space, the shuttle needed rocket motors a lot more efficient than engines used to put Apollo on the moon. With new ways of making special parts, engineers developed innovative ideas for a motor that had to fire again and again and again. Shuttle engines would be throttled up and down and last for at least 50 missions. No one had built rocket motors to do that before. Heat-protective tiles built to last at least 100 flights would insulate the metal skin from high temperatures on re-entry. Made from a silica fiber, they were quite unlike ablative shields designed to burn slowly. Tiles would simply glow and last a very long time. John Young and Bob Crippen were chosen to fly the first shuttle, as much a pioneering mission as the first Mercury flight had been 20 years earlier. Because the shuttle would carry toxic fuels, a quick means of emergency escape might pay off in a minor accident involving the crew. And even a rope was better than clumsy ladders in situations where time was of the essence. New ways of doing things in space, made possible through the remarkable qualities of this spacecraft, meant training took on a special purpose. All the old familiar routines were still an essential part of crew preparation, but with 30 or 40 flights each year, the astronaut office would soon become a production line for pilots. Gone were the days when team members trained exclusively for one mission. Now, with a comprehensive background schedule, astronauts would be prepared for a standard shuttle flight and spend only a few months training for specific tasks on a particular mission. Simulated weightlessness helped familiarize astronauts with new equipment. Pilots would only carry suits along for emergency if the cabin sprang a leak, or if they needed to go outside. Tailored suits were a thing of the past, and a new set of interchangeable torsos and limb segments fitted all sizes. Crew simulators took on the appearance of an aeroplane flight deck, signaling the new age of reusable space transportation. And because the spaceplane had wings, practice now included landings in standard jet trainers. Space Shuttle Columbia was towed from its hangar to the giant assembly building, and all across the Cape, technicians and engineers groomed elements of America's new space program. At launch, the shuttle would weigh 2,000 tons and leap towards space with the power of 200 million horses. It was a marriage of the rocket and the aeroplane that many had thought would be the way men first went into space. Now, picking up the challenge of a true spaceplane set by Scott Crossfield in the X-15 2 decades before, American astronauts were going back into orbit. Bob Crippen joined the astronaut team in 1969. His commander, John Young, had been in space 4 times. Their special suits would protect them if they ejected on the way up or down, different from the spacesuits carried on later flights.
Is underway.
In the pre-dawn hours of April 12, 1981, 20 years on from the day Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space, Young and Crippen rode a bus to Launch Complex 39, where a space plane stood waiting.
The firing system for the sound suppression water will be armed.
And from their position high atop the launch pad, the two men got ready to fly the world's first shuttle.
Flight instrumentation recorders are on. We're just a few seconds away from switching to the redundant sense sequencer. T-minus 27 seconds. We have gone for redundant set sequencer start. T-minus 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15, 14, 13, T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start. We have main engine start.
Confirm solid rocket booster step. Onboard guidance is converging as programmed. Columbia is now steering first precise window in space for main engine cutoff. Standing by now for external tank separation. Roger, we confirm the step, Columbia. 9 minutes, 3 seconds. Confirm external tank separation. Columbia now performing an evasive maneuver. Moving below and beyond and translating to the north of the external tank. Young should see it moving away out his window.
Columbia, Houston, your go for nominal ohms 1 and for APU shutdown on time.
Less than 9 minutes after liftoff, the shuttle was in space, with Crippen getting ready to stow unnecessary gear and open the payload bay doors. The cavernous bay was 60 feet long, the light graphite doors fitted with radiators for getting rid of excess heat, serving to protect cargo placed inside for launch. No sooner had the cameras turned on than controllers saw a few missing tiles on one of the engine pods. But they were in an area which would keep fairly cool on re-entry and pose no problem for the landing. The huge payload bay could carry up to 30 tons of cargo on later flights. But for the first, a package of instruments.
We're trying to put that on TV right now.
Roger, Crip, we can see that good.
And we're
Down below the flight deck, a spacious living area served as bathroom, toilet, exercise pad, and galley. And below that, a basement cellar for equipment and supplies.
CDR seat, and you might tell me how your reception is.
okay, we've got a good picture, Crip.
Okay.
All too soon, it was time to head for home and carry out the first glide re-entry with a winged vehicle flying at 25 times the speed of sound.
We've done every test that we're...
The payload bay doors were shut, and 2 days into the mission, the shuttle got ready for its biggest test yet. They would soon know if those tiles worked.
Anyone ever expected to do on a first flight?
John and Crip, we're 30 seconds from LOS. Want to report that Columbia...
2 engines at the rear of the shuttle fired briefly to slow it enough for a long glide toward thin air, and then full deceleration in the denser atmosphere below.
The burn.
And we can fly like a can.
Mark Mach 9 at 9,700 feet per second. Columbia, you got perfect energy, perfect ground track.
Roger that.
And John,
we're showing you rolling right. Looking good.
I'm on roll.
Chase will be on time.
Okay.
Columbia, you're really looking good. Right on the money. Right on the money. Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful.
We'll stop.
This is Mission Control Houston, the unofficial...
On its very first flight, everything had gone better than best hopes indicated it might. But there was still a lot to do, and many tasks to carry out to make it safe for the crew to emerge.
At least 26 more minutes on the ammonia. You're looking real good.
John Young led Crippen down the steps, the first Americans to walk away from a manned spacecraft.
Instructions were prepare for
For 12 years, 50,000 people had worked to make the shuttle a reality. Now 2 men had literally flown back from space, and a new window opened on an age of space, unlike anything yet seen. It was the beginning of at least 100 flights to come for the shuttle called Columbia, and for each of the remaining shuttles called Challenger, Discovery, and Atlantis.
We have main engine start. Minus 3, 2, 1. We have ignition. We have ignition of the solid rocket boosters and liftoff. Liftoff of America's Space Shuttle. And the Space Shuttle has cleared the tower.
Houston now controlling. Mission control confirmed roll maneuver started.
Columbia, Houston, you're going 40.
Roger, going 40. And master arm bandits.
Everything in the payload.
On its second flight into space, Columbia carried a bionic arm and a TV camera to see the shuttle as only spacemen see it.
Okay, Sally, we've got the arm secured right now. We're just getting ready to activate the...
The arm itself signified the international nature of the new space age, and would be the means by which objects large and small could be moved in and out of the cargo bay.
Is out for the first time. She's been deployed, working great. We have done all the way through page 1-12, and we're sitting, waiting for the Surrey data take to be over to get back into it and do the THC.
In test after test, the arm was put through its paces, and in mission after mission, the shuttle explored new corners of its performance envelope.
Okay.
On the third flight of Columbia, the astronauts carried a large pack of scientific instruments and tested new equipment to show the flexibility of the shuttle and its systems. Their flight concentrated on measuring the environment in the payload bay, photographing the Earth, and demonstrating several unique ways the shuttle could be used for better space operations in future. But one of the more exciting tasks involved the arm and a plasma package, built to look at the way Columbia interacted with the solar energy streaming past Earth's atmosphere. The fourth flight of Spaceship Columbia would be the last test mission.
We tried to activate the getaway, and
Flight number 4 completed a series of shakedown missions, clearing the way for paying customers with commercial satellites. It carried equipment for the Pentagon, heralding a new age in which military and civilian users would both fly aboard the same bus into orbit. And the shuttle was a bus, designed for routine trucking operations, moving cargo off the Earth into space. With flights now on a regular schedule, shuttle astronauts could settle down to medical tests and exercise routines to see how the body behaved in space. It was like Skylab in miniature. When the fourth flight of Columbia came to an end, it sealed the future for shuttle. The next flight inaugurated an era of commercial opportunity.
Looks good. 2 minutes, 15 seconds. Confirmed solid rocket booster separation.
Designed to provide economic and affordable access to space, the shuttle is based on reusing as much as possible after each mission. The big boosters lifting shuttle on its way are jettisoned on the way up and recovered for use on a later flight. In this way, costs are kept down to help lower fees charged for launching satellites. Only the big external propellant tank is thrown away on each flight, tossed into the ocean where it breaks up harmlessly. Recovery costs work out more expensive than production, so here too the shuttle is economical. The fifth flight took 4 men up for the first time, but its purpose was to deploy 2 satellites, one for Canada and one for Indonesia, shuttle's first commercial payload.
Santiago AOS is 8:11:02. We're looking forward to a good deploy report. Everything looks right on the money to us down here right now.
Set spinning for stability, each satellite was held by clamps to a special table. Just at the correct place in orbit round the Earth, the astronauts set instruments to launch the satellite. Traveling at 5 miles a second, their timing was crucial. At the precise moment, 3 little springs pushed the satellite free. It was as simple as that, but a beautiful sight for all aboard Columbia.
We got SBS on time, and if you're interested, I'll read you the pad.
Roger, go ahead.
Okay, current attitude, 24.19er, 87.41, 292.65, errors, plus 0.08, minus 0.08.
We have main engine ignition.
Proving that what goes up need never come down, 2 empty places for satellites now in orbit. But the mission did have some failures. 2 malfunctioning spacesuits prevented a planned spacewalk, a legacy for the 6th mission, the first flight of NASA's second shuttle called Challenger.
The period of maximum aerodynamic pressure.
Launched 2 years to the day after Columbia's first flight, Challenger gave 4 men a ride and a spacewalk for 2 along a very precarious handrail.
Touchdown time at 5 days, 0 hours, 23 minutes, 42 seconds.
Running to keep up with a male-orientated job, astronaut Sally Ride would become the first American lady to fly in space. Russia launched its second woman cosmonaut just before the 5th shuttle flight. But Sally would fly with 4 men on a flight to launch satellites and stretch the bionic arm in a demonstration of how it could capture and retrieve satellites already in space. With fittings for her space hat and training that made no concessions, Sally had to do everything the guys did and more. Training was always strenuous, and the less physically strong just had to work harder. Ejection seats had been removed from the shuttle after Columbia's 4th flight, but if it ditched at sea, shuttle would make a terrible boat. Water survival was essential. And weightless training was a great equalizer. Central to the success of Shuttle's 7th mission was the huge arm that would grapple a German satellite back in the payload bay after first deploying it in space.
7, 6, we go for main engine start. We have main engine start, and ignition, and liftoff. Liftoff of SDF-7 and American
America's first woman astronaut, and the shuttle has cleared the tower.
Roll program.
Roger your roll, Challenger.
Houston now controlling. Mission control confirms roll maneuver started. 20 seconds. Thrust looks good. 25 seconds. Roll maneuver completed. Challenger 21 nautical miles in altitude. Standing by now for solid rocket booster separation. 12 minutes, 12 seconds. Confirm good solid rocket booster separation. The booster's falling away now.
Challenger Houston, your go for a nominal ohms 1. APU shut down on time.
Roger that.
Commanded by Bob Crippen, the flight was the first to carry 5 people into space, and Sally was in her element.
During the opening.
A quick burst from a rocket motor sent a shiver through Challenger, the camera bouncing in its bracket.
Okay, Houston, things are looking good on board.
Roger, we copy, and you all look good to us.
Also on hand, a pharmaceutical test rack for the new vaccines promised from space manufacturing plants.
Roger, and we'll have you for about 2 more.
The answer is there is no problem.
Yargety's next at 1+4.
Even on board, Sally was still running, but not to catch up.
Roger, you might check a camera.
Roger, we understand. We saw some good views of the Earth through your cameras.
And the candy bar did taste very good, even on the jog.
Much better.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And the mass spec is...
But sometimes the most sociable astronaut needed moments of privacy, a modesty not seen on area
We're
flights.
working on a go for the R-bar separation, but we need the processor temp. Roger that.
Now it was time to put out the German satellite, fly off, come back, and retrieve it for return to base.
And TJ, we just turned on the mass spec to...
The operation was a dazzling success and revealed new fields in which the shuttle could best provide its services to man. With a myriad escorting satellites, relaying communication, storm warnings, and a promise of better and more effective ways to manage the global garden, shuttle could become custodian of a better world. Space fills the needs of man, as countless lives saved by satellites now testify. If space can be a preserved arena for combat against common threats from pollution, malnutrition, starvation, and thirst, it will have served man very well. Man went to the moon not because of his technology, but because of his imagination. Denied that imagination, he cannot best deploy the technical resources here today for a better world in the future. The shuttle is the foundation on which that future rests.
Outstanding, John. Thank you.
But there is a challenge to the use of space for man's welfare. Satellites also serve to threaten the very survival of mankind. Every every hour of every day, year in, year out, satellites control weapons whose use would unleash a colossal force of devastation unlike anything conceived by the natural world. Their purpose is to control forces of destruction when all human contact is lost, to prosecute total retribution from beyond the grave upon a host unable to save itself. On mobilization, Navstar would be the critical link through which information would be channeled for accurate targeting by weapons blinded in the electronic countermeasures of modern war. When the fighting starts, all control of land and sea forces will survive only through satellites in space, stretching the conflict and broadening the base of the battle. But all this is not inevitable. Built by a group of European countries, a laboratory designed to fit inside the shuttle will give scientists a new look at making things in space for people on Earth. To fill the shuttle's enormous cargo bay, Spacelab provides room for several scientists who work together. Astronauts will work in the laboratory to seek ways of preparing new medicines, growing semiconductor crystals for the electronics industry, and preparing new alloys. Spacelab will revolutionize the way we understand science. In the second half of the 1980s, a 20-ton telescope will be carried into space by the shuttle. With this instrument, observers will see 350 times the volume of space seen by the most powerful telescopes on the ground. New machines will fabricate structures and steelwork to build stations and bases in space. On each mission, beam builders with rolls of aluminium will fabricate girders a mile long, from which orbital Spidermen will construct huge platforms. From these, giant assemblies would grow to make solar power satellites, each generating the output of a nuclear power station on Earth. The fiction and fantasy of today will emerge in another century as the first space cities of a new cosmic age. In huge cigar-shaped colonies, Earthlings will create a world of wonder to rivet the imagination, renewing in space opportunities lost on planet Earth. And beyond the limits of time, the Earth, the planets and the Sun will be left as a dim reminder of where it all began. Life itself will have outlived the solar system that gave it birth. The choices before man today are clear. He lives in ever-enriching harmony with the universe or dies, forgotten on a wasted planet. It could be that this will be the end of man's story on Earth, or it will be the genesis of a new race, a man whose being extends into the furthest regions of the cosmos.